Hello and welcome to Accreditation Conversations. I'm your host, Amy Dykens of Weave, and today I have the opportunity to interview Dr. Mark LaCelle-Peterson, who is the President and CEO of the Association for Advancing Quality and Educator Preparation, AAQEP. Mark comes to this work with AAQEP with many years of experience in educator prep as well as accreditation. And I fondly remember him as the president of TEAC, the Teacher Education Accreditation Council. In this interview, you will learn about a new accreditation approach, what it takes from an accreditor perspective to really approach a brand new standards-based accreditation process, while also preserving the ability for programs to be flexible and to meet the needs of their local environment. Mark will talk about innovation as well as aspiration for those programs. And in the end, quality assurance as something that really gives institutions and programs the opportunity to focus on quality and to tell the story of their successes while also surfacing in a reflective way opportunities to improve. Hi, Mark. Thank you so much for being here with us today. I'm really looking forward to our conversation. And I'd like to get us started off on the right foot today. You spoke recently to me about an opportunity you had to participate in an accreditation workshop, and that you left that workshop with comments that were related to folks had fun, and that fun and accreditation frequently don't go in the same sentence. And so I wanted our listeners to have an opportunity to hear from you a little bit about that experience.
Sure. And thanks, Amy, for giving me the chance to talk with you here. Actually, we have found throughout AAQEP's existence, we've been around for 4 years, by the way, a little over 4 years now, that fun and accreditation actually are starting to go together more than people would think. Here's a way that I often start workshops. I didn't happen to start this one this way, but I often start workshops by saying, what is it that makes you proud of your program's completers? Why are you proud? And then the next question is, what's the best evidence you have to justify that pride? And we base our work on that premise that folks are proud of what they're doing, that there's good quality to be brought forward, that there's also plenty of room for improvement, but that the conversation about taking our good work and making it better can almost always be a fun conversation because it's about the positive things that we do. So in our experience, people are coming out of workshops saying they feel energized by accreditation in a new way and that they're looking forward to digging into the work. So we do try to put the fun back into accreditation, strange as that may seem. But someone asked me once, how are you going to know if what you're doing is working? And I say, if most of the time it feels like we're having fun. It's also work, plenty of work involved, but it's good work.
I love that. So. Excellent. So thinking about something you said right there that I thought was really critical for people to remember and take away from accreditation processes. This is about successes too. This is not about somebody external just coming in and looking for all the problems that you have. Really an opportunity to talk about the successes and the things that you do well.
Yeah. And the generic term for accreditation, or a more generic term, is quality assurance. And so I always assume that if you're going to have to assure somebody of something, and it's going to be quality. So that's what the conversation has to be about. What is there that's going on that's of quality? Of course, looking also for ways that there can be more of it, that we can improve it. And how do you feel assured about it? Which always drives us to the evidence. It's like, how can you, in fact, in that same set of interchanges, I'll say, could you prove it to anybody other than the candidate's mother, right? Or family members? And if you're going to prove it to anybody other than the folks who want to believe the same thing you do, well, then we get into this interesting work of saying, well, what are the performances? What do employers say about your candidates when they hire them? What do you see in their work in the schools? How, what are the positive ratings that you get? What can you affirm and say, this is why you should hire our candidate. This is why you should come to our program, because you're going to be well prepared on this. And we can show you. And that's good work. And that is what gets people excited.
Really nice. And thinking about being willing to say, and we can prove it. In accreditation, the word evidence is fairly pervasive, but I feel like I have not yet heard another accreditor really speak to being able to prove that you're doing the good work that you know that you're doing. And so I'd love for you to say just a little bit more about that.
Well, in the accreditation world, one thing that observers have noted is that professional programmatic accreditors working with professional programs have a real advantage because we have clear performance expectations for our fields. In our case, we work with teacher preparation and other educator preparation, and those performance expectations are they're out there in the field in the ratings that are used for teachers on the job, for example. They're out there in the state performance standards. And so we've got some wonderful measures that give us performance information. None of them perfect. There's no perfect measure. There's no perfect system. But we've got the benefit of saying, yeah, we know what it is you're supposed to be good at. And we know what some accepted measures are of being good at that. And so we can gather that evidence well. We can talk about the reliability of the ratings. We can talk about the substance of the evidence being linked to agreed upon standards, whether at the state or at the national level. And that makes it an interesting work. And you truly can say, yes, these performances really do represent what it is that we hope a professional educator will be able to do when they start. We can follow up and say, and are they actually doing it? So it's an exciting area.
Absolutely. And it actually brings up that many of our listeners are probably not especially familiar with the processes that AAQEP has developed. You're newer in a space that's very mature. And I would love for you to kind of share with folks a little bit about the journey that brought you to creating a new accreditation.
Sure. A number of years ago, there was just a growing sense among deans of education, faculty in education, and among state education department folks involved with educator preparation and the certification licensing of teachers, that it was time for a new conversation to start. And so some of us who were involved in thinking about this were actually approached by people from combinations of education preparation folks in higher education chiefly, and folks in state education departments saying, could we do some rethinking? And so in 2017, we decided to take the plunge, and we brought people together on Zoom before Zoom was cool, and created a framework with folks from across the country, literally from Hawaii to Manhattan, and from the Upper Peninsula of Michigan down to the tip of Texas, to think about what would be a set of standards we'd all agree to stand behind, and to think about what a process would be that could be engaging and collaborative. And a key thing we've been trying to do is to enlarge the circle of learning. One of the interesting things about accreditation is it involves intensive work locally to study yourself, to gather evidence, to put it together into a package, and then to invite reviewers to come in, a peer review team to come in and scrutinize that evidence and gather more evidence. And you learn a lot doing it. Reviewers always say great professional development to be a reviewer, but that circle of learning almost turns into a silo of learning. And so what one of our goals was from the beginning in establishing this process was to say, let's de-silo the learning and expand the circle of learning, so we all learn more together. I went a little bit aside from your question, but those were some of the desires that were motivating this new effort to come together and create a different quality assurance framework that addressed some of accreditation's perennial challenges in a different way.
Nice. And so as you really built out that framework with this collaborative working group, you approached it with some specific philosophies. And I know you and I talked a little bit previously about, the kind of core areas that must be a part of standards, and some things that you really wanted to incorporate to encourage innovation and programs to be aspirational. Can you talk a little bit about that for us as well?
Would love to. In fact, Peter Ewell, about a dozen years ago, identified this problem with accreditation standards. He said, if you're not careful, accreditation standards are going to become a ceiling on quality instead of a floor. They're going to define things so much that you don't get above it. You don't grow anywhere. If we just accept the things we know today we need to do, where do we look in our dynamic fields of scholarship and of practice for the new things that we need to be doing, for the innovations we need to be engaged in. So we very consciously tried to bear that in mind as we developed the standards for AAQEP. And we wanted our standards both to reflect the fact that educator preparation is a mature field with a solid research base behind it, with years of practical wisdom, with plenty of folks looking at the evidence, with some great professionals working on tools to provide the evidence in terms of assessment instruments. So there's a lot that's known and a lot that's agreed upon and a lot that's established. But at the same time, like many other fields, educator preparation is a dynamic field that has to do its work in very specific contexts where the needs of families and students and communities and schools are different from in other even corners of the same state. And so we wanted the standards to also to have a dimension that's open. And so we said, well, how can we address this problem of needing to have a clear foundation in the things that are expected today, but also room to dig into context and to be open to the innovations? We said, well, maybe one way to do that is simply to name it and to have two different sets of standards, if you will. So the conceptual framework we work with, I'll just describe it for listeners and viewers. If you imagine a sort of 2x2 table, we have standards that are about two things. They're about completer performance, because like everyone in accreditation, we're concerned chiefly about outcomes. So one column for completer performance, another column for program practices, because we know even though our focus is on outcomes, there's things that we have to do to ensure that those outcomes can be achieved, right? We're not agnostic to those things. Sometimes they're thought of as input. We think of them more as capacity and processes. Okay, so there's program practices that have to be there. And then we said in each of those columns, let's acknowledge that there's a foundational level of standards, the things that we know have to be there. For example, if you want someone to be able to teach mathematics, you have to be sure that they know the math content. You have to be sure they know math pedagogy. You have to be sure they've had the opportunity to practice putting that into practice in a field setting with a qualified person supervising and supporting you there. We know that you need to have had some independent practice in a culminating clinical experience where you could do it, right? All those things we know have to be part of it. You have to measure the ability, measure the math content, measure the knowledge of the pedagogy, the ability to implement it and to operate independently. But then there's some other, so that's that foundational level of thing where we've had a lot of practice in measuring that and looking at that, documenting that. But there are also things that teachers need to do. That math teacher, wherever they are, also has to interact with families and caregivers and guardians, and also has to be aware of making the math make sense in the local context. Those are harder things to measure. There's not a standardized license test on family and community engagement, but we know it's important to work on. And the way you're going to work on it is different if you're in Brooklyn, New York, if you're in Buffalo, New York, or if you're in Belfast, New York, which most people haven't heard of, a little tiny town in the southern tier in Allegheny County, very rural location. So we said, well, let's just make those separate sets of standards and say, we know what we're going to get in one set, and it's going to be relatively similar. And then let's look for experimentation and variation. So still compelling evidence, but recognizing there'll be variation in evidence, and it'll be a space that can encourage innovation and to let different folks approach common challenges in very different ways with their local partners in their local setting. And we found that to be, part of the source of the actually interest and engagement and excitement of the process, is that folks can dig in their local context and work on things that they feel are really good work that they need to do in their own way.
So it sounds like you're, just to kind of process that a little bit, it's that you've got some standards that what I would call maybe table stakes, right? These are things that you expect to see in an educational program. And then you've organized in a way that allows folks to be flexible in thinking about what are the needs of our particular stakeholder audience that we serve. And that both of those, regardless of the setting, as you said, urban, rural, there may be other, certainly many other contexts that you might identify, that it's not so much that you're prescribing to them. This is, regardless of where you are, you still must do it this way. Rather, it is, you show us, right? You are, your job is to convince us and assure us that you are doing these things and taking the context into account very clearly when you do those things for your students and in your program, not just locally, but also thinking about, folks that you're students that graduate might go to. Does that kind of summarize the thinking around that?
It does. It does. And then in the design of our system, we continually look for ways to, in addition to doing the quality assurance review and making the accreditation decision, to helping folks share those things that they've learned with others in the association and more broadly than the association. So that's another part of that broadening the circle or enlarging the circle of learning, to say, we learned how to do that this way here. Let's share that and to give others the opportunity, to learn from the work that each program has done.
Nice. And how are you accomplishing that sharing?
There's sort of two ways. One that's well developed and built in already in our system, and another one that's still, again, as a 4-year-old agency, we're still looking to continue to expand and put some things together. The most immediate way that people get the opportunity to share together is in what we call our cohorts. Any institution, any ed prep program that joins AAQEP becomes a member of a cohort. And a cohort is a group of 10 to 12 institutions that meets together once a month on a Zoom call with a full-time staff member there. And this accomplishes two things for us. One, it lets people share their knowledge, share their questions, share what they're learning, be mutual support to each other. So that's really positive. And it also makes sure that every institution has contact with their full-time staff liaison at least once a month, or they have the opportunity to. We don't take attendance. It's not mandatory. But we do find that we have any given month, anywhere between 60 and 80% participation. And across the year, everyone, all members typically participate in the cohort. So that's one way, sort of an immediate sharing of things in an open-ended way. We also have, and I said we hadn't developed it, in a way we have our Quality Assurance Symposium annually, and those are peer-reviewed sessions where people propose things, 4 sessions that they've learned in the accreditation process. So there's a way of sharing. We're also hoping to develop means of publishing some white papers or some compilations of results. That's a little bit still on the drawing board, how we're actually going to accomplish that. And lastly, we also have 3 times a year, sort of unpopular. Every summer we survey our members and say, what is it that you're most interested in learning about from each other? And then we look around through all of our members who've done this work and identify usually 3 pairs. So we'll do fall, winter, spring, what we call member voices quarterlies, where our members will report out on things that they've done that the wider membership has said they're interested in learning about. So this year it's been on creating a culture of data. So we've had several institutions already present their work on how they went about establishing that, so that everyone was engaged in looking at the assessment evidence and thinking about how to use it in a productive way, which is one of the desires of every accreditation system, but it can be a challenge to actually put into practice.
Very nice. And it's so interesting to me as I've had the opportunity to learn more from our programmatic accreditor partners and interacting with folks recently at CHIA, that really sometimes it feels like on campus there's a like us versus them kind of mentality. We're on campus and the accreditor is out there waiting to get us, and and maybe there was that feeling at one point, but it seems to be shifting quite a bit, especially in, and maybe it never was that way inside of an accreditation organization, but it feels like we're seeing a really strong kind of revolution in accreditation thinking, where this is really a community of practice, right? This is a community of folks who care deeply about these disciplines that you accredit. And as a result, they've come together as a membership to identify best practices, to share innovations, and then incorporate that into the quality assurance practices. And I think that is not always understood on campus, honestly. Has that been your experience as well? Or you've been around this for a while? What are your thoughts?
I think you're right, and I think, and I hope you're right in identifying that shift in that movement. And that was very much self-consciously something we hoped to accomplish, and I believe we are accomplishing with AAQEP. Marilyn Cochran-Smith has a wonderful framework for this. Viewers in Educator Preparation might be familiar with her book, Reclaiming Accountability. She has gone on and done some additional writing exploring this theme of intelligent shared responsibility, that says we can think about evaluation and educator preparation programs along these lines. We're all professionals who share knowledge and expectations, And we're going to document the work. We're going to interrogate the work. We're going to critique the work, just like we do in our scholarship, with the goal of making things better. But there's a presumption of shared judgment and of shared commitment and of a positive approach to the work that could characterize what we're doing. And so we're very interested in continuing to interact with her framework on that, and to maybe add to it in some way if we can. So I think we're seeing, we survey institutions whenever we're done with an accreditation visit, and one of the big questions, and those surveys come out looking nice. One of the things we wondered was, when you're through with your accreditation visit, will you keep showing up at the cohort meeting? Right, that was sort of our question. Right, the cohort meetings are nice for helping people get prepared and get ready and get their questions answered. Are you going to keep coming when you're done? And we're finding that by and large, yes, people are, because they're coming back with additional questions. And so instead of seeing the accreditation framework as strictly an evaluative one or solely an evaluative one, although of course there is an evaluative moment in it in a cyclical way, that it is a supportive process of ongoing learning and ongoing improvement. In fact, we tried to weave in as much of Tony Brake's improvement science work as we can, as well as a framework for thinking. And people resonate with that a lot. Thinking about improvement as a continuous and ongoing and iterative process.
I have to say, I love how well read you are, Mark, and you're giving folks several resources along the way that I hope that they'll investigate. I will follow up on a couple. I've read a couple of them, and a couple of them are new for me, so I'm looking forward to that. So thank you. You also then, you're highlighting the importance of this work being really grounded in good research and taking theory and translating it into practice. And I had a similar conversation with Linda Susky when she was on the show, where she was speaking very strongly about seeing a need for accreditors to help drive improvement in teaching on campuses by establishing standards that are more highly specific, really, from her perspective, around using good research-based teaching and learning practices as something that's really a part of a standard that you would evaluate. And I would love to hear your thoughts about that.
That is such an interesting question. And I will just comment, Linda Susky's work was formative for us as we were putting together the framework for AAQEP. And in fact, in March, she spoke at our Quality Assurance Symposium, and we were just delighted to have her part of that conversation. This idea of a stronger standard around faculty performance, essentially in terms of teaching and of pedagogy, is an interesting one, not surprisingly a controversial one in many quarters. I would say I'd have to acknowledge we don't have a standard on that. We do look at faculty qualifications and we look at candidate experience. So what I can say confidently from the material we've looked at is that universally, candidates in programs, that's the term we use for the students in educator preparation programs, right? Candidates comment so frequently on how appreciative they are of the faculty in the program for the way that they modeled good pedagogy for them. So in the field of educator preparation specifically, this has been a focus. And of course, it's not universal. One always hears the lamentable stories of practice that's out of date or inconsistent. But by and large, what we hear is very affirming of the quality of teaching. So that's an idea from Linda Susky that we will definitely take into consideration. By the way, we are halfway through the 7-year life of our standards, and so we're just beginning the standards renewal process for our organization. And so her voice on that issue will certainly be one that comes into play and that we'll think about. I can say we have a high level of confidence in the quality of instruction that goes on, both from what we hear consistently and from the sort of guardrail moves that all accreditors make of saying, we want to be sure that the courses are evaluated. We talk to students and ask about instruction. So we've got good evidence there, I think, but it's not on the basis of a specific standard. So I think that'll be an interesting conversation for higher education to have in general.
Yeah, excellent. And as you said, there's a lot of ways that we already address this. And I think that when I prompt prompted her about, where does she see accreditation going, in the future? What is, if she had a magic wand, this was her thing that I was a little surprised, honestly. But she felt very strongly that this was something that accreditors could do to be able to really strongly impact the future and the promises that we're trying to keep to students. So I've been kind of asking folks, what do you think? And do you do that today, or would you do that in the future? And we'll see.
I think if it were to come into the system, I would imagine it would have to come in through a contextual and aspirational standard to work on the conversation. Because just in thinking about it before we started talking today, I was realizing, in our own field of education, we have some behaviorists who would say, yes, I have a very research-based approach to teaching. We have Vygotskians who would say, yes, I have a very research-based social cultural approach to teaching. We have folks who would take a very direct instruction, Madeline Hunter approach. So it's actually a little bit of a minefield you'd be opening up, but to actually have an open conversation about pedagogy and the basis for it and the impact of it would be absolutely welcome. Be a very welcome conversation.
Yeah, I like that. It's exciting just to even think about it. And I love that you're surfacing all the different ways that may be, again, like you said, there are many pathways to meeting a standard, right? And so what I think is important is that we keep talking about it, right? Not so much that we say that, and this is how you do it kind of thinking. I'm going to switch gears just a little bit and ask you a couple of more specific things about your particular accreditation approach related to assessment of student learning. I've been asking lots of folks about this because there's, again, like a philosophical approach that we see some folks, approaching this work very differently than others. And specifically, we're talking about, competency-based education kind of movement, proving learning by individual students, and thinking about, what would you do if you, understood that a particular student was falling short, and whether or not your particular accreditation organization approaches thinking about assessment of student learning and the assessment of SLOs from a very individualized student perspective, or are you looking at things from an overall program, more of an aggregated perspective? Just want to learn a little bit from your thoughts on that topic.
Yeah, that's interesting. And as I said earlier, professional program accreditors, AAQEP in particular, working with Educator Preparation, has an advantage of working within a fairly defined taxonomy of performances and the things that learning outcomes, how learning outcomes would be described. For example, delivering an effective instruction that includes looking at assessment results and differentiating instruction for learners to lead to success and being able to document that success, just as one example. So every one of our members that is accredited has had to show the Accreditation Commission that it was able to document that, and that at the program level, above a certain threshold of candidates are able to do that. And often the results are very strong, are very high, right? You say, yes, we've got evidence that virtually all of our candidates do. And in fact, that makes sense because they wouldn't be able to get a teaching license if they couldn't, right? So there is I have a high confidence in the strong performance of individual students, of the great majority of individual students. But even those programs that we've accredited that work on a competency learning basis, Western Governors being the largest of them, still report results in an aggregate way. So I think it's an intriguing question. I'm not sure what an accreditor would say if you knew that 2 students didn't do so well and opted to switch out of the program, right? We are attentive to that in our conversation, and do, have the expectation that in fact, there is a positive requirement in our system that campuses sort of look empirically at their admission process, at their monitoring and support processes, all the way through to the successful completion or to the counseling out or unsuccessful completion of candidates. So there's attention to it. But I guess I'd be interested to know sort of how you were thinking about the question and what you were wondering it might
Yeah,
look
it's
like.
interesting because we spend a lot of time at Weave supporting programs and supporting institutions, and we run into folks who seem to interpret their accreditation a little bit differently than how I would interpret it, and which is very aligned, honestly, with what you were describing. They get down into the nuanced details and very granular thinking about, I must prove that every single student from our program has accomplished every single SLO that we have defined, or else kind of feeling. And we try to have that conversation back with them of, no, it's really about the quality of your program. Yes, obviously you have to have systems in place to be able to support all types of learners or a struggling learner. But accreditation, in my experience, both on campus as well as 10 years working in institutional effectiveness, is really not that accreditors are looking for you to prove individual student learning. Rather, they're really looking to say that most students who go through your program are going to be successful in their chosen field.
And that's a great way to express it. And that's the aspiration of our programs. But at the same time, and in particular, I'll give a particular example of one of our member institutions. They are moderately selective, probably technically, but practically speaking, virtually anyone who comes to the program can try. And it's the campus policy that you can pick whatever major you want, so you can try to work through it. They've got a wonderful tiered support system in place. So students that come with a particular academic profile will be sort of pointed to the program requirements, advised to meet with an advisor regularly, and move on through the way probably many of us went through our programs. Students with performance histories that would call for greater attention are assigned greater levels of support, right? They are strongly encouraged to access all of the learning support systems on campus that are appropriate to supporting and meeting their needs. And so a very purposeful way of going about this. And they end up with a higher than the institutional average rate of success in their program. They also routinely help students decide that another program on campus is better for them because in their case, it's a rural campus with a lot of first-generation students. Quite possibly the only adults with baccalaureate degrees that many of these students knew were the teachers in their school. So if you go to college, it must be to become a teacher. Maybe it turns out your interest in math could take you in a different direction with accounting instead. So help people discover that, help people move. So we encourage that attention to individual students to help them find the path that's going to work for them. And those that make it through the program and are, recognize that completion as being competent have to be competent. But along the way, if there are some who, for various reasons or for life experience reasons, I mean, the last 2 years have certainly taught us that the best intentions of a student to enter a program and to proceed through it can be undercut in a lot of different ways by environmental factors, health factors, family factors. So, we try to take a contextual approach to understanding all of that as well.
Nice. And I love that you guys have spent quite a bit of time thinking about contextual clues. And you remind me, so I'll drop a research for everybody as well. Perna's model of student choice is a really nice framework that talks quite a bit about exactly what you're getting to, where that experiences students have before they come to you are going to influence their post-matriculation decisions, right? Including their major, including whether or not they, do a good job of learning how to study and use the resources on campus and all of those things. And I appreciate that you're calling out that one of the indicators of quality is that there are systems in place that help students take advantage of guidance and coaching that's available. And in some cases, helping them decide that this isn't the right path for them is absolutely.
Exactly. Yeah. And campuses are full of such wonderful, rich resources. And I came into higher ed as part of that resource support system in a writing and tutoring kind of a context. And so always delighted when folks are encouraging students to access the many resources that are available that oftentimes they're reluctant to access or don't know about, and those are important successes and part of the strength of our institutions, right, as they can support students learning and growth.
Very nice. And so I want you to tell one more story really for us. You've had such a unique experience and opportunity to lead an organization in a mature space that is new and thinking about this work in some different ways. And one of the things that I'm aware that you guys did is that you really approached some of your first work by partnering with state governments. And that's in a world where folks are kind of beating up higher ed a little bit for not playing nice with employers, not playing nice with state governments, and trying to like kind of look inside themselves for all the answers. You did it a little different, and I'd like folks to hear that story.
Well, a very early moment in our existence came when one of the states, where both the state education department and the various deans groups had been encouraging us or had been looking for a new approach in accreditation and encouraging us. We had a meeting with them, and it was with the state education department and a representative from the state ed department, a fairly highly placed official there, and from the public and the private sectors in the state. And it was in a conversation where the state representative looked at the three sets of institutions and said, "Do you think we should go ahead with this?" And they all agreed. And that is what gave us a little bit of a boost, well, actually a huge boost to move forward. The field of educator preparation is interesting, not unique, but has this characteristic that the ground rules for programs are very much established by the state where they're located. Your goal is to have your candidates graduate, get a license, and be effective teachers or other education professionals. There's a great gatekeeping, and view was always, it does no one any good to have the accreditor and the states on different pages or doing different things. And we each have unique roles. They have a compliance role that has to be played and a regulatory role. We have a standard setting and quality assurance role, but they can be very complementary. So from the start, we've tried to assure our members and assure the states that our goal is to work together. And we have a lot of fun with that as well. I know people are going to think accreditation is nothing but fun with us, but we started a monthly video call with state education department staff saying, this is an open conversation. It's actually your agenda to set. If you've got questions, come together, talk with each other, come together, talk with us about accreditation. And that's been wonderful. It's informal, except in the sense that we send out an invitation every month and we open the Zoom meeting and we're there to listen and we're there to talk. So we've tried to foster that kind of, again, to enlarge the circle of learning and give people the opportunity to ask questions of each other and to interact together there. So that's been wonderful. We've got agreements with a number of states. We're always working on having agreements with most states. And one of the things that we do is we say, if you're a state education department official with responsibility for approving programs of educator preparation, and you want to attend any of our online events, and we have an agreement with you, just let us know. We'll make that available to you. And if we're doing any trainings within any state, we say, as long as you can get yourself there, come for no cost. We're happy just to have people involved and around the table together. So it's been another very enjoyable part of the work, and we've got some great partners in the states and really enjoy working with them.
Yeah, excellent. It feels so critical to have cooperation. Especially, as you said, in a highly regulated, if you will, field like educator prep, where you're cooperating with each other, but even, as you said, taking it to a level where it's a partnership, where you're both doing things that are your appropriate roles, but in a synergistic way that can really elevate educator prep for that state. And I am looking forward to seeing where that continues, because I think it's a really strong proposition that your organization is offering to folks. Mm-hmm. So thank you for that.
And maybe I'll just say one more thing on that. The last 2.5 years experience has been very poignant in this regard. So from the beginning of the pandemic, when people asked us, what are you going to require as an accreditor? We said basically 3 things. Number 1, keep yourself safe and your candidates safe. That's the primary concern. Number 2, whatever the state guidelines are and affordances are, follow those and let us know about them, and we'll build that into the way our expectations work. And number three, if your data collection is interrupted because everything is kerflooey, right? It was tough for people to get into field placements. It was a shift from campus-based learning to online learning. We said, document the data, put the little asterisks, and put a little explanation of how the pandemic disrupted what you've got. And we heard two things. We heard from our members that they responded very positively to that guidance and to that flexibility, I guess it would be fair to call it. But interestingly, we also heard from state and system people saying how positively they responded to the fact that we were just all working together and trying to support people through this. So it was our orientation anyway, but in the last 2.5 years, it's really paid a dividend for us and for everyone, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And it makes me think, we really want our students to be flexible and adaptable and creative problem solvers. And what a refreshing opportunity to listen to an accreditation organization that is not only encouraging that, but also really being that themselves. And so kudos to you guys for the work that you're doing and for really being a support for your programs that are taking care of their students the very best way that they can in serving their needs and keeping the promises without reducing the level of quality in your programs or anything like that would put those students at risk later. I think that we're seeing that as you guys continue to grow, and I can't wait to see what the future looks like. So as you continue in this work, I'm sure there are folks out there who are listening that may be interested in learning more or to be in contact with you to continue the conversation. How should they get in touch with you?
I always welcome emails directly to me. My email is m.lacelle.peterson@aaqep.org. That's a mouthful and a lot of letters to keep track of. So if anyone sends to our general information line, aaqep@aaqep.org, just indicate what information you want, and that can get forwarded to me as well. And our website, aaqep.org, has a wealth of resources and also ways of getting in touch with us.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Mark. It's been a pleasure.
It's been a lot of fun to end where we started. Thanks, Amy.
It is always such a pleasure to speak with Mark. Really, it takes a lot of initiative and energy to be willing to step out and start a brand new accreditation process, especially in an industry like educator preparation that is already fairly mature and has a long history of accreditation processes. And I love the work that I'm seeing AAQEP doing for students and programs where they're really focused on being flexible, adaptable, while also holding folks to a very high standard of quality for the product in the form of students that they're producing. The future of education is very much in the hands of the accreditors. It feels like who are giving the stamp of approval of quality to the programs that they're accrediting. And I can't imagine an organization that is better equipped to be able to fulfill that role for the stakeholders like the public, parents, and the students, employers who hire their graduates. I look forward to seeing much more work from them as they continue to get traction around their partnerships with state organizations. They are growing rapidly in their adoption and the ability for a program to go to them for accreditation and still maintain their necessary state level approvals. And it will be interesting to see how their cohort model continues to grow and expand that circle of learning that Mark spoke about out to other educator prep programs. But I think that we will also see that circle of learning expand into other accreditation organizations. They have a lot of really interesting things happening, and we could all learn from them both on a campus perspective and institutional effectiveness and how an organization can really promote a culture of learning and growth, as well as in the accreditor space where they're doing some really neat things to help their programs aspire to do great work for their students and to think outside the box in many ways to meet the context of their local environments. Thank you for joining us today. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Accreditation Conversations, and I look forward to seeing you again next month.